And our next witness, I gather, wants to be known as Richard.
That's correct, sir.
May we have Richard, please?
Please state your full name
Richard Raymond Titheridge.
and repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely,
I do solemnly and sincerely
and truly declare and affirm
and truly declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the
and
truth.
nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Richard, you're
Yes.
here to talk about your late wife, Tricia,
Yes.
who died of HIV in 2012. Can you tell us first how you met?
It was through a mutual friend that I was sharing a flat with her boyfriend, and they were working together, and then we just met one New Year's Eve.
And what was Tricia like?
A little bit wacky, a little bit, but a lot of fun, and just full of life.
Tricia later wrote a book, and in it she's described the two of you as this: he's a big, tall, relaxed Englishman from Hampshire, whereas I am a small, frenetic Scottish woman. What was it that they say about opposites attracting?
Yeah, it was an interesting start that we had. But, you know, when you hit it off with somebody, you just hit it off, and there was no question about it. It was almost at first sight, really. So,
You married in 1980
yes.
and lived down in Surrey.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1982, Tricia was pregnant with your eldest daughter.
Yes.
What happened during that pregnancy?
She developed a bowel problem, and it got really quite bad as the pregnancy went on, and it was a long labour, and she just was in a lot of pain with it, and then she started to go for an examination to see what the problem was, but she should have had a cesarean instead of giving birth naturally, because she was quite small and the baby was quite large. So.
But your eldest daughter was born naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And what was Tricia told about the bowel problem, the ulcerative colitis, at that point?
Well, she was told by the consultant at Redhill Hospital that it could be something that came with pregnancy, and if she got pregnant again, it might just go away. But as the pregnancy went on, she got really very ill. And, you know, she developed this preeclampsia and all sorts, but she wanted to leave it until there was a viable, you know, chance that the baby would survive. So
That was your second daughter.
Yeah.
In 1984.
Mm-hmm.
And the colitis got worse and worse,
Mm-hmm.
and Tricia was admitted into hospital.
Well, she got rushed into St Mary's in Paddington when my daughter was, well, the baby was about 28 weeks, and the only place that had a special care unit and somewhere to look after my wife was St Mary's in Paddington. So, but she was in a really bad way. She had bloated up and with the preeclampsia, and so she was just full of fluid, basically, and so it was an emergency operation she had to go through, therefore.
And what was the operation that she then had? She
Well,
had the emergency section.
She had an emergency section, and Rebecca was born at £2. But while she had the cesarean, they had a look at her bowel, an X-rayed her bowel, and they said they thought it was fine. And then when the X-rays come back, they said it was paper thin and it would have to be taken out.
So within 24 hours of the caesarean section. What did she have?
She had an ileostomy, where all her large bowel was removed.
And she was told she was the first ever patient to have a caesarean section and a total colectomy
At that time,
at
yes.
the same time. After the colectomy, Tricia became unwell. Can you tell us what happened?
Yes, she was lying in hospital, the hospital bed, and she kept complaining to the consultant that she felt this burning going on inside her, and she was feeling really unwell and in quite a bit of pain. But the surgeon said it's just post-operative stuff. So, but it turned out to be septicemia. So.
And what happened then?
I got called in the middle of the night where she had to have an emergency operation, and they needed my consent because they didn't think there was a chance she wouldn't survive anyway. So that I got through there, and I just sat all night and waited while they operated and drained all the whatever it is out, and but fortunately she survived.
Your understanding is that she received blood transfusions during both of those operations, both the colectomy and then the subsequent operation in relation to septicemia.
I think that is correct, yeah.
We'll come to the letters a little bit later, but that's your understanding.
Yeah.
When Tricia came home from hospital, what was her prognosis? What did they say to you?
Well, it was just, at that point, it was just rest and rebuild, and she had the bag, which she found hard to deal with, but she got on with things, and gradually she built up. She was very weak when she came out, and there was I think they may well have given her treatment for cancer as well, or some treatment, because all her hair fell out, or most of it. It was coming out in lumps, and she had her head sort of pretty much shaved, or a crop. But she picked up, and things improved.
There had been some precancerous cells found,
I think,
so she had some radiotherapy.
Yeah. Because I actually didn't remember it, but she reminded me that she went to oncology. So, so I think that's what she had while she was in hospital. So.
In 1985, she then had some revision surgery on her bowel, but that was all relatively straightforward.
That was just the final bit. It's what they call the total colectomy, I think. Or is it a stumpectomy, I think it's called. So that was it. That was the final bit of the jigsaw, so to speak, yeah.
At about that time, you both started seeing things in the media about an AIDS scandal.
Mm-hmm.
What did you and Tricia think about at that point?
Well, it was quite alarming, really, because it was all to do with St Mary's in Paddington. How I can't remember whether it was on the news. I think it may well have been on the news, or the paper that I bought at the time, the Mirror. So and so as soon as we got the chance to see the consultant as in a routine checkup, she asked the consultant if she was in danger of having that.
And what was his response?
No chance. No, don't be silly. And that was it. Just waved his hand. And
in 1990, you moved up to Scotland, to Perth. And from then until about 2000, what was Tricia's health like?
She was pretty good. We just got on with things. Had a pretty normal life. It was just normal, really. She was in good health, really. I mean, the bag was always a problem with her. But she didn't tell people about it, and she would wear tight jeans and things like that. She just never told people, and nobody really knew. And that's the way she wanted it. So, because, those sort of things people find a little bit odd,
But then in 2000, what happened to Tricia?
She started to develop symptoms. She got a red butterfly thing around there, and she started to get very tired. She had quite a lot of different sort of. They thought she had lots of pains in joints, and they started. They thought she might have had celiac disease or a lupus, and or something like that, or even arthritis. They tested her for all sorts of things. She had something like about 200 tests done on her.
You were getting quite concerned about what was going on.
Yeah.
And then Tricia was also then made redundant from work.
Yes, she couldn't stay awake at work anymore. She actually came home at lunchtime and didn't eat and just slept because she was so tired. She fell asleep in her work, and she just had no energy whatsoever.
But the doctors were still not sure what was wrong.
No.
And you then went to see a doctor privately.
Yes.
And did you get any answers then?
No. We went through the whole story. We told about the blood transfusions, about everything, and nothing. We didn't even get any feedback at all.
When you raised the question of whether there might have been a problem with the blood transfusions, what were the doctor's responses to you?
Well, my wife had this sneaking feeling that something. She always thought she had AIDS, and we did sort of ask about it, and they said, "Well, you've been tested for everything," and it just never really occurred to anybody to test her for that. And even though you told them about the blood transfusions, the time slot, and when it happened, and everything, and but nobody really got to grips with it.
Between the year 2000 and 2002, you've said in your statement that Patricia's condition deteriorated.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about that?
Yes, she was getting worse and worse. She looked awful. She had all this red blotchiness, and she was getting a bit thinner and tired, more tired. And then by Christmas 2002, she was lying down for the whole of Christmas Day, and then the next day she couldn't even sit up. She couldn't talk. She was making no sense in the things that she was saying, and it was patently obvious that she was very unwell. So we got the doctor in, and the doctor just rushed her up to Nine Wells Hospital.
And at first, doctors treated her with huge doses of antibiotics.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did they help?
They did for the first couple of days. Things seemed to settle a little bit, but then it just drifted back to the other way, and it was 10 days after she was in that they asked to test her for HIV.
And you agreed?
Yeah.
And the test came back positive.
Mm-hmm.
How were you told about her results?
My two daughters were with me, and we went into a private room, and the consultant told us that Tricia was HIV positive, and they were going to do some tests and things to see what was going on. And in some ways it was a big shock, but not surprising, And then the consultant said that we would all need to be tested to see if we had the virus.
And what did the consultant tell you about Tricia's condition?
He said that it was very serious. She had a thing called ETH. He said that she had multifocal leukoencephalitis, and that she had 6 to 12 months to live.
At that stage, how much information were you given about the HIV and AIDS?
Not a lot, really. It's the consultant, the community nurse probably was better than the consultant in telling us what was going on and, about what it meant and all this sort of thing. but I knew a bit, but I learned a lot more since. So, but there wasn't a huge amount of sort of telling us what it was all about. No, not really.
You've said in your statement that initially the information you were given could have been better.
Yeah.
But after that, the support and information you got was good, and you felt you did have enough information at a later stage.
Yeah.
When you were given the diagnosis, you were with your daughters. What was their reaction to the news?
Well, pretty much the same as mine. You know, we were all shocked. And then we just drove home, and I think I bought a bottle of whiskey on the way home and made a hole in it. So, and then, you know, next morning, the cold light of day, that's when you start to sort of really think about things and what it means. And, you know, we were looking at a 6 to 12 month time frame. But it's pretty shocking, really.
Tricia was then started on HIV medication. And with that first set of medication, how did she respond to it?
Not well at all. Not well at all.
What happened?
I don't know quite how to put it, but she wouldn't. There was no common sense in anything that she was doing. It was. She wouldn't know night from day. She didn't know where she was in the house. We put a sign at the bottom of the staircase to say your bedroom's that way with an arrow, because she kept going upstairs and our bedroom was on the ground floor. And she just didn't know where she was. And then she would wake up and say, let's go for a walk. And it would be like 2 o'clock in the morning. And I said, well, it's night time. And she said, no, it isn't. And there it was pitch black outside. And she just didn't, I mean, it was a really weird time. And she just she didn't react well at all to the drugs.
And what was her mental state like at this point?
Pretty poor. In fact, very poor. Because the inflammation in the brain had affected a lot of things. And with the medication that she was on, and that, it was just hopeless. She wasn't in a good place at all.
How did that manifest itself?
Well, after the, that went on for about three or 4 months, or about 3 months, and then the consultant changed the combination of drugs that she was on to, I think it was Viramune and Combivir, and that she reacted much better to that.
But in that really bad patch, you've described in your statement that she just simply couldn't stop crying.
Oh, well, that went on for about 5 years. It went on until her tear ducts stopped working. And then the crying all the time was a big thing. But then, you find out afterwards that it's the parts of the brain that were damaged affected her moods and her logic and all the things that most of us take for granted. And she didn't have any of this.
And it wasn't just bouts of crying, it was crying for hours and hours on end.
Sometimes it would be 24 hours almost. It was just non-stop. It was just a very difficult time coping with that. It's not easy to try and do something with somebody that doesn't understand what's going on, and just crying for. But she didn't. I mean, presumably she just didn't know what she was doing, really. So.
As you say, they then changed her medication, and things improved a little bit.
She started to pick up, and the levels in the blood started to balance out better and get better. She did improve once the new drugs were in place.
But you'd had to give up work in 2003. Why was that?
Well, she wouldn't let me out the house, virtually. Well, it was as soon as I went away, I would get a phone call to come back because she was crying and she got hysterical. And even though we had somebody, a best friend, living with us for a time, excuse me, she couldn't help. She just wanted me there all the time.
You've described in your statement that you spent virtually all of 2003 sitting on the couch with her.
Yep. It was just, she just didn't want me away from her. It was as simple as that.
Did you tell Tricia about the diagnosis initially?
No.
Why not?
Because memory was so bad and because of the problems that she had, between the GP, my GP and the consultant and myself and my daughters, we decided not to tell her because you would have to tell her every single day because she couldn't, excuse me, because she couldn't take in anything. So it would be like Groundhog Day for her every day, and we thought that would be cruel. So we decided to keep it to ourselves and not tell her.
You did tell her that she was HIV positive in April 2004.
Yeah.
Why did you tell her then?
Well, because she'd improved mentally, a bit mentally, that she could understand, and also the psychiatrists were going to withdraw treatment unless she was told, because the law in Scotland was slightly different to the one in England at the time, and they said, the patient has to know what's wrong with them, which I objected to, but in hindsight it was probably the right thing to do, but it was a lot of pressure that the psychiatrists put us under.
And when you told her her diagnosis, what was Tricia's reaction?
She said, she was shocked. She said, I knew, and that was it. And then started crying, and she always had a feeling, ever since the blood transfusions back in 84, 5. She always thought that there might be something there, and she just said, that was all she said. She said, I knew it. And anyway, we went on from there and tried to piece things together. Unfortunately, she did improve enough, and she managed to cope to a point.
She said in her book that it made sense of how you'd been treating her for the last 12 months.
Yeah.
Because you'd been treating her like a princess.
Yeah, she couldn't understand why we spoiled her so much and let her get away with everything. But, we only thought we had that small time slot anyway, so I thought, well, to hell with money, to hell with this and that and the others, so we just let her have what she wants. So.
Did you tell anyone else about her infection at that point?
Yeah, friends knew, and Tricia's family knew, and of course, close family.
And what about friends who were just in the town that you lived in?
Well, we live in a sort of a funny wee area. I suppose you could almost call it like a hippie commune. But we all live in, there's 7 friends, and we all live in the same area. So we sort of walk through each other's gardens. It's a nice place to be. And they're all close friends, and I didn't have a problem telling them because, they were good support as well through the time.
From knowing her diagnosis for the next couple of years, what was the impact emotionally on Tricia?
Well, the crying was a big thing. Everything was about... She got terrible mood swings, and various things. I mean, as I said, the logic side of her brain didn't work. The reasoning, she didn't have any reasoning, and she was just she was a shell of what she used to be. But the crying and the emotional side of it was awful.
Then in 2005, Tricia took an overdose of diazepam.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, she just got him out the medicine cupboard. I used to keep the medicine in a cupboard, but she got it out and she took a load of diazepam. But she was on so many drugs at the time, the diazepam actually had no effect on her whatsoever. And we took her to the hospital. I was pretty angry with her, actually. And I took her to the hospital, and they said, no, she's fine. You know, no drugs had any effect on her. She was on lorazepam. I think she was on morphine sulfate at one time. I can't remember what that was for. She was on sleeping tablets. She was on... I can't remember how many pills a day that she used to take. But the doctors used to keep prescribing pills on top of pills on top of pills because they couldn't work out what to do with her. You know, they didn't have any idea how to deal with the problems.
So she was admitted at that point into hospital for a period of time.
Yes, it was one of the worst things I had to do. I had to get her sectioned into Murray Royal Hospital because she was just getting worse and she was on so many drugs, and I thought, well, this might be the only way that we could perhaps get her settled down. It's not a nice thing to do to see her, you know, to walk away at night and they lock the doors and things. But they did actually do a very good job, Murray Royal. They got her off a lot of the pills that she was on. They settled her down into a pill regime that seemed to be much better. And, you know, it was, I suppose it was a lot easier for the psychiatrist to deal with her then when she knew what she had. Because when we used to go to meetings before that, the psychiatrist would almost say it, what she had, and I would look at them as if to say, no. But they did get her off of a lot of the hardcore lorazepams and things like that, which, you know, we couldn't have done at home because it was like going cold turkey, and so they needed to monitor her, you know.
The HIV also affected her brain in other ways, and you've said in your statement that she heard voices.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that?
Well, it was a particular... We were going to a wedding, one of Tricia's family's wedding, and she suddenly developed this sort of echoing in her head, where if you said something to her, it would just go over and over and over and over again in her head. She had... The only way she could get round this, and it was driving her completely mad, was to just have constant music on all the time, so something was, you know, it was changing all the time, because she couldn't stand it. It was really quite a difficult thing for her.
So from then on, you also lived in the house with music playing all day, all night?
All night, yeah.
24/7?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, it's fine for a while, but it just gets to you. You know, we didn't watch television because she couldn't concentrate on television, so the music was an easy thing for her to be able to, you know, take in, because she knew all the songs and things, and she just... So it was just constant, the music, day and night.
You've said that it affected her logic, and one of the ways it affected her reasoning and logic was that she would buy clothes.
Yeah.
What was that about?
Well, that was about... She always had to get on a high. She didn't have a medium level of mood. It was either high or on the ground. So she would go out and go around the shops and buy things to give her a high. And she'd come back, and for 20 minutes, she'd be as high as a kite, saying, look what I've bought and that. And then within 20 minutes, it was back to the moods, it was back to the same old low mood, black mood.
And you tried to reason with her about the clothes shopping. What did you say to her?
I said, do you think you've got enough now, And she didn't. She just couldn't see, and she agreed, and then the next day she'd be out buying more.
You said in your statement she was like a child in some ways.
Oh, she was very childlike after the infection got into the brain. It was like having a young daughter, again, but worse, if you know what I mean.
Between 2005 and 2011, things had settled down a little, and she was able to do some things.
Yeah.
And you were able to go on holiday together.
Yeah, we went to Australia. We went on family holidays as well, and we tried to pack in as much as we could, really, because it was just, and also, planning for things like that kept her occupied, and the excitement of going on a holiday would keep her mood a bit better, there was less of the lows, so it was quite a good thing to do, and but the holidays were actually quite hard work because you couldn't do the normal things. Like we went to Australia and I virtually saw nothing. Because by that time she'd actually turned to drinking. She started chain smoking when she got ill, and I don't even know how many. She used to have these roll-up cigarettes, and people were doing it. Like we had a few people rolling them. She smoked that many, and she'd given up smoking. This is where, and I said, you're smoking too much, far too much. But it didn't have any impact. She just wouldn't see that as a problem. And then it was the same with the drinking. One night, I remember I was trying to get her to relax, and I said, why not just have a glass of wine and relax? Well, that was the worst thing probably ever did, because she took to the drink, and ultimately that was her downfall.
In that quiescent period, that slightly better period, she wrote an anonymous article for Grazia magazine as well. It was published on the 8th of May 2006.
Yeah.
Could we have 0252006, please? We've got a copy of the article. And in it she describes over the years the contaminated blood issue cropped up from time to time, but when it came on the news I became adept at shutting it out. And just before that she said, ordinary middle class women with families like me simply didn't get AIDS. That was her insight at that time.
Yeah.
Of what was happening.
Yeah, because all the HIV, well, it was just called AIDS, wasn't it? Then infections happened to people that were drug dependent and the gay community and stuff. And it didn't happen to ordinary people like Tricia, that she couldn't really understand it. When all the stuff came out about blood transfusions and things like that, well, it became evident that it was people like her that could get affected just as much as anybody else,
And she speaks in the article later on about the catalogue of emotions that she faced when she was told the news that she'd always dreaded.
Yeah. She must have known herself that she could be. And, emotionally, she actually, if she'd have been completely sound mind, it probably would have impacted her more But because she wasn't, she probably, it wasn't so much of a problem, or it was still shocking, but she would have reacted a lot worse had she been completely mentally capable.
In that time, she also wrote a book called Catching the Reaper.
Yeah.
And if we can have 020, we can see the cover of the book and also a lovely picture of Tricia.
Aha. Yep, that's the book.
During that time, sorry, go on.
No, sorry, I was just going to say I wouldn't like to tell you how many thousands it cost to get it to that, but that's another story.
But it was something she felt very strongly that she wanted to write.
It was a cathartic sort of exercise, really, because she'd had a really interesting life, and she was a character, and she felt it would be a good thing to do. And it started off as a wee exercise, really, to try and give her something to occupy herself. So we got a new computer, and then she would just, she would type away all day long. Her typing skills were still fine then, and so she got, the more she got into it, the more she said, I'm going to write a book, and that was it. And it did keep her occupied for quite a while, as you'd imagine. And then she got the sort of the ghostwriter in to get it into that format. Originally, it was a vanity book project, but then she thought she'd make $1 million selling her own book.
During this time as well, she became involved in campaigning and became friends with various other campaigners.
Yeah.
And in that work, you and she obtained 2 letters that you're particularly keen for us to see. Mm-hmm. Could we have 0252 please? This is a letter dated the 17th of December 1990 from the Divisional General Manager of the Scottish National Blood Transfusion Service to the General Manager of the CSA, the Common Services Agency, which is part of the Scottish Health Services. First of all, where did you find it? How did you come by this letter?
Well, a good friend it was in the same trust as my wife, the Eileen Trust, Gary Kelly. He was a big campaigner, and he had like stacks and stacks of files, and that he'd been doing it for years because he'd known since the 80s that he got infected when he had to go in for leukemia. And him and my wife, they became very close because they both had the same problem, and it was like a shared thing. And he was very, I wouldn't say communist, but he was a socialist. And he was very friendly with Caroline Leckie, who was a socialist MP in Glasgow at the time. And she suggested, under the Freedom of Information Act, that we could go through to the Edinburgh Parliament, where we could look at documents released under the Freedom of Information. And we were sifting through, and there was so much of it. But a couple of things just appealed to me to get copies of. So.
And this one is headed HIV patients infected by transfusion. It says, the last time we discussed the moral responsibilities of the SNBTS and the CSA in connection with infected patients, we were talking about haemophiliacs. Mm-hmm. And then if we carry on down, we know that there are 18 haemophiliacs in Scotland who were infected with HIV by infusions of our factor VIII. Others were infected by commercial products, and though of concern to the NHS, are not directly our concern. Mm-hmm. Data available at today's date tell me that there are also 12 other patients, non-haemophiliac, infected with HIV by our products, either by blood transfusion or administration of other fresh or cellular components, RTC products. I'm finding it very hard indeed to put together in my own mind a reasonable argument in favour of paying out between 20,000 and 60,000 to each of the 18 and nothing at all to the 12. Clearly all this, and towards the end of the document, clearly all this is the kind of dynamite that one would like to keep safely locked away in a cool, dark place We mustn't wish the crisis on ourselves. I do feel, however, that it's a matter to which we have a duty to turn our attention. Now, clearly, Tricia had received blood in London, not in Scotland, so she wasn't one of those numbered, but this was important to you.
Yeah, it was, because it was the same health board at the time, wasn't it, back in the 80s? It wasn't devolved to Scotland. So I assumed, or I think that's right, but I assumed that whatever happened in Scotland is the same down in England, you know, because it was... but, I mean, I could be wrong there, but I just thought this was very interesting, and it's the sort of the way they phrase things. It just sounds like, it doesn't sound right to me.
And then also 0252013, which is the other letter that you've provided us with in May 1991. The same Divisional General Manager. My letter of the 17th of December was written out of a serious concern that this issue would return to haunt us just as soon as the haemophiliacs cases were settled, and that the effect on the service could well be very damaging. Now, as practically all the national dailies follow the Observer's lead and closer to home STV give the subject exposure on primetime news, interviewing an HIV patient on camera directly in front of the Edinburgh Donor Centre, the heat under this one is really being turned up in earnest. And then 2 paragraphs down, quite apart from the moral and political arguments in favour of settling these claims quickly, which surely must be very compelling in themselves, I really do think we could make a good case based purely on managerial common sense and cost effectiveness. What was your response when you read these?
I just thought, well, this is ridiculous. I just thought it was uncaring. It just, the way it came across to me, I just thought, you know, they're just trying to cover their backs, and you know, it's just, you know, people are just not important. It's more about what they were thinking. That's the way I read it. It's like their attitudes towards it. I found quite cold and uncaring, really.
And then returning to what was happening with Tricia. In 2010 and 2011, Tricia's physical condition declined.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, she started not to eat so much. She started to drink more and more, and she smoked more and more, and she just, I've never really been able to, I tried to tell us, you know, cut the drinking down, you've got to eat more, cut your smoking down, you know, you're not doing yourself any good, but nothing registered. So eventually she just started to get thinner and thinner and weaker, and we were, in August of the year she died, we went down to visit my parents, and we went for a pub lunch, and she twisted her ankle, and from that moment on she barely walked again, because it was not like you and I would, you know, want to even walk with a stick till the ankle improved, and you know, because it was just a sprain. But because her brain wasn't working in the same way, it was a major thing. And she started to walk with a stick. She then ended up with a Zimmer frame to get around, and really there wasn't any reason for it, really. But in that period of time, she just went downhill, and you know, she was looking awful. She probably weighed under 5 stone, and it was almost a long suicide. That's the way that you can describe it, I suppose, because she did it to herself in a way. You know, I don't know whether she just thought, I've coped long enough with everything. You know, she'd had huge operations. She'd been through 12 years of torture. Maybe she'd had enough. Maybe there was something in there saying, I can't do this anymore, and I'll just, finish it off.
You had very little help at that point in caring for her.
Uh-huh.
And the situation took its toll on you.
Yeah.
In 2010, you took an overdose.
Yeah. Well, I'd lost my freedom, pretty much. She wasn't like that as a person before. I mean, we had our own interests. I used to go out and play golf, or I'd go to work and I'd do all the stuff that you do normally. And then all of a sudden you become in this environment. It was almost like being in prison. And, after this, I was probably about 9 years into it, looking after her, and it was constant. And I don't know, one Saturday night, something must have clicked in me, and I thought I'd had enough. And there was a bunch of sleeping pills there and some whiskey, and so I just took it. It's something that I'm actually quite ashamed of, and it's the one thing that I really regret. But as you can see, it didn't work. So
You were taken into hospital, checked over,
Yeah.
and there was no major damage.
No, obviously, fortunately, I hadn't taken enough, whatever.
But after that, you ended up with a little bit more help.
Yeah, my wife got, what do they call it? I forget now. A personal assistant, which was for 15 hours a week. And she would come and sit with my wife and stuff and allow me to get out a bit more. But then I still got called back. The personal assistant at the time would just take her up for a coffee, and then she'd find the charity shop and she'd go and buy some more clothes. And that's what she was like.
You've said that Tricia was declining over that period. She lost a good friend of hers, and her sister had also died.
Yeah, Gary Kelly died, which she was very upset about. And then her sister died, which had a big effect on her as well, because it was like her closest sister. And she actually came to stay with us for quite a while to try and help look after her, but it didn't really work. Nothing really worked, to be honest.
And you've said in your statement that at that point it seemed like she just lost the will, she'd run out of steam.
Yeah, I think so.
And she died in December 2012 of pneumonia.
Pneumonia was on the death certificate. Maybe the heart just packed up. She was very weak and she was very thin. And when you lose muscle in the body, you lose it around the heart as well. So either or, really, I'm not sure. But yes, I just came down I slept up the stair out the way of the music, and she slept down the stair, and she managed to hobble in, and she was sitting on the couch with a cigarette in her hand, just dead. And that was it. Fortunately, she didn't light the cigarette. So otherwise, we might both be dead.
You've said that throughout this time you were trying to protect your daughters as much as you could.
Yeah, from the daily troubles, really. It was very easy. It was easier for my oldest daughter because she was already at university. Or she was just about to go to university, so she sort of got away from it. But my youngest daughter, she probably had more. It had more impact on her.
And what has the effect of Tricia's illness and death been on your daughters?
They both coped very well. I think, well, one certainly. But I think they both cope very well now. But it must have had a huge effect on them. You lose your mother like that, but having to look after her the way that we all did, it wasn't like their mother. She was more like a young child, which was quite difficult to deal with, I think.
And what's the effect been on you?
Well, took a toll on my sanity, I suppose. It's been 5 years or so now. What the big thing is, when you've been it's like being in prison and you come out, it takes a lot of time to adjust. And that's what I felt like. It wasn't easy after my wife died to sort of almost get back to normal. I mean, my work had suffered hugely, and, the business that I built up was sort of in tatters a bit. And then at 60, I was 60 when my wife died, and, trying to pick up and build up again was pretty difficult. But I've come through that now, and I'm sort of okay. Obviously, I mean, Trisha's not there, but, in some ways, when she died, it was a bit of a relief in a way, a shock, but a relief at the same time, because I watched her suffering for so long that I didn't have to watch that anymore. And she wasn't in pain.
If we can just go back in the chronology to 2003, the doctor treating Trisha wanted to trace whether she'd received infected blood. And as you understand it, he wrote to the NHS Blood and Transfusion Service. Can we have 0252005, please? This was the first reply he received on the 26th of June 2003, saying, "I'm sorry, I have no information about this woman's transfusion history in the 1980s. Although I wrote to request information, I've had no reply from the consultant haematologist at the hospital concerned. There have been problems in relation to access to records at this hospital, but I've written again to ask for confirmation whether or not any records exist for this lady. I'll keep trying, but I'm not optimistic that any useful information will be forthcoming." Then in October 2003, he received a further reply, 0252002. And we can see in the main long paragraph that there is a note that she had underwent a total colectomy. There's a record in the notes of 5 units of red cells and 1 unit of fresh frozen plasma. There is a note about the next operation that she had. And it says there's no indication how many of the recorded units were administered to Trisha, but we have proceeded to attempt to trace all those recorded in her file. Unfortunately, there are often problems in dealing with information obtained from microfilmed records. I'm assuming that the entries were made by hand and the opportunity for transcription or reading errors is quite high. Of the 9 donation numbers identified to us, only 4 have been positively linked to donors. All these donors continued donating and were tested and found anti-HIV negative on more than one occasion. There are a further 2 donation numbers for which we've not yet found records, but we're still searching. We've been able to confirm that one of the donations listed was actually returned to the NBS unused. The final 2 donation numbers are rogue numbers and do not exist. And then if we can go over the page, I think it's 003. At this stage, the donations which have been linked to donors have all been excluded as a source of HIV infection. We're still attempting to trace 2 donations, but we know that a further 2 will never be traced as the numbers contain transcription errors. And the writer says, "I will write to you again when I have the outstanding information." In 2003, you weren't told the detail of those letters.
No.
In 2004, you were simply told that they couldn't trace the blood.
Yes, yeah.
Because at that time, you were making an application to the Eileen Trust.
Yeah.
There is then nothing further until June 2007. If we can have 004, please. 12th of June 2004. Thank you for your letter of the 5th of June 2007 regarding correspondence we had in 2003. I recall the discussions and the issues that arose at the time and note with embarrassment that I didn't write to you again after my letter of the 8th of October 2003. At that stage, we'd established that 2 donations couldn't be linked to donors, probably through errors in recording of donation numbers. We were attempting to trace 2 further donations, and I undertook to write to you again when we had the outstanding information. It's clear we were unable to obtain any further information concerning these 2 outstanding donations and have been unable to positively identify them from our records. It goes on to say, in the second paragraph, I note that Mrs. Titheridge and her husband have recently been participating in the inquiry into HIV infection in relation to contaminated blood products. That was actually some litigation that you were thinking about being involved in. I also note that they are not aware of the contents of my letters. So you hadn't been provided with the information from the letters beyond the fact that the blood couldn't be traced.
No, we got to see these letters in around about 2007, around about that period. Dr. France of Nine Wells, he supplied us with these letters, and then that's when we went to get full medical records from St Mary's in Paddington.
Which we'll come to in just a moment.
Which we'll come to.
The next long paragraph of this letter explains that letters of a sensitive nature were labelled private and confidential. And the writer of this letter has indicated that she would anticipate that subjects of the letter would be allowed to see the contents, but for various reasons that hadn't been done. And so letters were now addressed confidential rather than private. And that was the explanation. Now, the reason the doctor was writing the letters in 2003 was to enable you to apply to the Eileen Trust. The community nurse and the consultant did the application for you.
Yes.
But it then took about 15 months for you to receive any money from them.
Yeah.
And as far as you understand it, the reason for that delay was because they were trying to trace the blood transfusion records.
That's what we believed was going on, yeah.
And so the delay in you receiving the money was because of the delay we've seen in those letters?
Yes, that's it.
When you received the money, did you have to sign anything?
They asked for a note to say that we wouldn't pursue any legal action if I accepted the money. And at the time, money was really very tight, to say the least. We got into a bit of debt. I borrowed money here off my family and even a friend. And, we had to freeze the mortgage because I wasn't working and there was no income, really. And so it was seen at the time as a bit of a lifeline to get into the Eileen Trust and be accepted. And then they gave us a compensation on the law of probabilities because they couldn't trace, they said they couldn't trace the blood. So, sorry, have I drifted off there?
Don't worry at all, you're answering the question beautifully. You say that they said that they couldn't trace the blood. You are concerned about that?
Yeah, because I assume, a friend of mine, a consultant nurse, said to me that it's really, that every blood sample is labelled and it's all monitored. So it was pretty lax of them if they had blood samples being given on to patients that they didn't know anything about. I don't see how that could be possible, to be quite honest.
But you received the money from the Eileen Trust and you had to sign the piece of paper.
Yeah, I wrote, it was handwritten on a piece of paper because I wasn't any good on a typewriter or anything. So I just handwrote a letter to say I wouldn't take any legal action and sent it to them. And that was it.
You've said in your statement you were glad of the money, you needed the money to stay afloat, but that you were not happy about having to receive it, having to go to the Eileen Trust.
No, I wasn't, because I'd never been that way. I'd never been out of work or anything like that, so I didn't feel comfortable about it because it was a charity. You know, this was quite a thing. You were getting charitable money, and it didn't. You know, you have a bit of pride, and you don't like to feel that you're some charity case, really, and that's what we felt. You know.
As we were discussing those letters, you said that we were talking about in 2007, the additional letter in relation to tracing the blood, and that was part of you seeking Trisha's medical records.
Yeah. Because
you were considering being part of some legal action.
That's correct. Yeah.
What were you told when you tried to obtain her medical records?
Well, you had to write in, so we wrote a letter asking for Trisha's medical records. And about 3 months later, I'd not heard anything. So I phoned and said, "Did you receive my letter for Trisha's medical records?" And they said, "We did, and unfortunately, they've been destroyed in a sewerage leak." I said, "Well, I'm not sure that's right, because the doctor at Nine Wells had obtained some records," and I said, "I think they're on microfiche." So she said, "Well, leave it with me." And then about 3 months later, I'd not heard anything back. And so I got in touch again, and I spoke to this woman who wasn't actually very friendly. And she said, "Well, we routinely destroy medical records after 15 years. And I said, "I thought they were supposed to go through with you for life, your medical records." And they said, "Well, unfortunately, we can't help you." So
Your MP also tried to access the records?
Yeah.
And you're particularly concerned that the records are missing because your wife, throughout, after her treatment, was seen as an important medical case because of the operation she'd had.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me that they wouldn't have her medical records. You know, this is the big thing, because if the medical records had existed, somebody might have twigged a wee bit earlier that this could be the problem, and she could still be alive today. You know, she could have gone on to treatment earlier, it wouldn't have affected her brain, and, you know, people are living longer and normal lives now, you know. But so the medical records is a big thing for me, and I've always wanted an answer to why.
Because your point is that if the doctors, when she first fell ill, had known about the transfusions and believed you about the transfusions, Trisha would have been tested for HIV/AIDS earlier.
Yeah, if you have 9 units of blood, or 8 units, in a window where people were getting infected at St Mary's Hospital, to go into the consultant and have the consultant just wave you away and say, "Oh, no chance," you know, don't be ridiculous. Why did it? Well, I mean, I don't understand why she didn't get tested then. You know, if you've got, I mean, it's just taking blood and testing it. And I don't understand why that wasn't done then, or called back when things really got heated up, and you know, tested her then. I mean, they should have called them back, really, and tested them, people that had the transfusions in that time.
Those are the questions I have for you. Is there anything else you would like to say?
Not really. I'm just hoping that that this inquiry comes up with a few of the answers I'd like. You know, the medical records and you know, the callbacks, and you know, I just hope people get some justice out of this, because it's gone on too long. I mean, 30 odd years is a long time to wait for this, and I just hope there'll be not too many people die before this comes out. That's pretty much it.
Richard, thank you very much indeed for telling us about the story of your your wife's illness and how it affected you and your family.
Yeah,
Thank you.
pleasure. Thank you.
Well, that concludes the proceedings for this week. We meet again on Monday at 10 o'clock.
That's right.
Now, who are we hearing from on Monday at 10?
We're hearing from Maria Armour, and then we'll be hearing from 4 anonymous witnesses, sir.
So, Monday, Maria Armour and 4 anonymous witnesses, 10 o'clock. I look forward to seeing as many of you who wish to be here then.